Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, which is all about statements of work and IR35. My name is Andy Chamberlain. I'm the Director of Policy at IPSE. I'm going to try and turn on my camera so that you can see me as well as hear me. And I'd be very grateful if you could let me know if you fill in the questions box that you can see and hear me okay, and that you can see a title slide up in front of you. I'm also going to introduce our guests today. We're very lucky to have Tom Whittle, who is the founder of Marvin Bay, and Phil Bennison, an IR35 consultant and project manager. Hi, Tom. Hi, Phil. You okay?
Hi, Andy.
Yeah. Good. We can hear you. So yeah, if people could just let us know you can see and hear us okay, that would be great. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in this topic?
Sure, yeah. So I'm founder and CEO of Marvin Bay. We're a B2B services platform to support contractors and small businesses that want to work off payroll. Came into the contracting industry in 2001 when I was working for a consultancy company, and so they were providing teams to go and work on site at investment banks under statement of work agreements, and I supported them sourcing contractors when they needed to draft in specialists for particular pieces of work. Then I moved into a sales capacity, so I was involved in defining the projects, the statement of works, working directly with the clients. Kind of became a little bit disenfranchised with consultancy because they, in my experience, there was a bit of a lack of transparency, all sorts of massive margins flying around in relation to contractors. And I was quite unimpressed with recruitment as well, where I'd sort of come from working with recruitment companies, sourcing contractors. I came to the conclusion that I thought I could probably do it better and in a more transparent way with, with fixed margins like you have in recruitment, but a bit more quality than you typically see. So I set up a recruitment company, and that was in 2006. I think our first client opportunity for a contract was a schedule of work agreement as well. So we, left consultancy, went into recruitment. First project was based on a statement of work, fitted that particular use case, but it doesn't always. And so I guess really what I wanted to talk about today, or why I'm here today, was I don't think it's always the right tool for the job. It is a useful tool, and we can discuss it later, but they're complicated. And I've made plenty of errors along the way. These are complex contracts. You'll get things wrong. Often they'll be outside of your control. So I just wanted to share some of my learning experiences.
Great. Well, we're definitely going to be covering all of that as well. We're very glad to have you here. And Phil, do you want to say a few words about yourself and your business as well?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I'm a consultant working around the IR35 space. I've worked in it in the public sector for about sort of 4 or 5 years, sort of building compliant IR35 process, building, designing, implementing, and currently working with Network Rail, which is the highest volume contractor user in the country. So in line with sort of HMRC expectations, you have to make sure it's an extremely robust process we have, because the more complex the organisation, the more contractors you use, the more robust your processes need to be. And essentially, I mean, I'm very pleased to be part of this webinar. As like Tom, we're both very ethical people, and we feel that whilst statement of works absolutely play an important part in the IR35 piece, I for one have seen quite a bit of snake oil around it, shall we say, being sold that you can package up genuinely employment-like work as being outside IR35 by just using a statement of work, and HMRC are smarter than that, and so yeah, just kind of here to dispel some myths and hopefully make sure everyone is bang on with their expectation.
Great. Well, thanks very much both for being here. Let's just quickly mention what we're going to cover today, and also I want to just reiterate to the audience that we want to hear from you, so do give us your questions or any experiences that you have that are relevant, any comments or observations, and we will our ambition as always is to leave some time towards the end of the presentation those questions. Strange echo. I hope that's not. This was me. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is what is a statement of work. We're going to have a look at that. Why they might help with IR35 compliance, why they might not. What are contracted out services, and where does that whole piece fit into this? And as Tom's already mentioned, what are the commercial risks of using statements of work? And finally, I want to sort of explore with Tom and Phil whether they think statements of work are becoming more commonplace as a result of the IR35 change. And maybe we can touch on one of my favourite topics in this webinar, which is what's the future of contracting generally, and do we see a sort of direction of travel on that, particularly in light of the IR35 rules, which of course, as you know, IPSE was strongly opposed to. And the other thing we're doing today, which is new for this webinar, is we're going to ask you a few questions via some polls. So I'm going to launch the first one of those now, I hope. And here we go. My colleague Sarah is on hand if I mess this up, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to do it. So I think I've launched it. So if you can see that poll in front, oh yes, you can. People are giving their responses already. Fantastic. I'm going to leave this open for about 30 seconds. So do fill it in. I can tell you that there's quite an even split of experience at the moment. I'll give you another few seconds. I can see that 75% of the audience have already voted. That's possibly about, oh no, it's still going up, 80%. Will it get to 80? Yeah, okay, I'll close it there. So, and I can share the results. Am I doing this right, Sarah? Sarah will let me know if I'm not doing it. I think you might be able to see the results of this now. So as we can see, if you can't, I'll tell you what they are, because I can't see what you can see with this. That 43% of you have used a statement of work before, and 51% of you have not, and 5% aren't sure. We don't know whether you've used one or not. So a real mixture of experience there. So that's quite interesting. Okay, well let's. I'm now going to hide that. Can I remove it? There we go. I think we're back to normal now. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Tom now to talk about statements of work. What are they? Over to you, Tom.
Sure. I mean, I'm quite surprised by the numbers, if I'm honest. I'm wondering if it's a sort of statement of work in its true form that people have signed up to, or just a time and materials contract that's actually got deliverables in it, as they always should have done. But I mean, a statement of work agreement it's essentially a consultancy agreement, and it's not even the full consultancy agreement. So if either a software firm doing professional services or a management consultancy is going to be providing a piece of work to a customer, the work is defined inside a statement of work. So the statement's an annex to a master services agreement, the main agreement that defines all of the relationship and the governance of that relationship with the provider. And the statement of work is, I mean, you could almost imagine it a bit like a project plan, although it's more detailed than a project plan. So it's, it's the definition of what the specific tasks are going to be in relation to any deliverables, what the objective is of that particular service or piece of work, what the success criteria are, which is something that differs quite substantially to time and materials. And it could also be, it could even define things like quorums for making agreements, stakeholders that need to make themselves available to, to provide input to requirements or whatever it may be. So up front as a document, it's a big thing to construct. It's probably more detailed. Well, it is more detailed than the project plan, and it's not something everyone wants to go through for every single piece of work they sign off. It's kind of like a tailored scenario versus off the peg. If you just want to get some people in to come and look at some new regulation that's disrupting your industry, you probably don't want to define to the nth degree everything they're doing. So it's a much more structured contract laying out the foundations of the work that's to be delivered. And it's often being used as a channel to engage contractors through during a headcount freeze. So procurement departments who normally manage these processes are quite wise to that. they normally want to see a degree of risk embedded into this, into this schedule. So scheduled payments, fixed price components, typically, not always. But because there's success criteria, even if it is just time and materials, the sign-off process is different. With time and materials, which most of us are used to, you sign off a timesheet, one person approves that timesheet, it goes off to billing via the agency or directly if it's direct, the payment's made. If you're talking about a schedule of work agreement or statement of work agreement and there's success criteria, whoever's responsible for buying that service is going to review review the piece of work. It probably may go to one of their managers to be signed off and for the budget to be approved for being released for payment. And suddenly you've got someone else or procurement, or another department looking at what were the expected outcomes, have they been hit, not just have we hit the time frame. So it's a more, that can open up more risk into the contract, even if it's time and materials, because all of a sudden you've got potential for dispute. Whereas if it's just time bound, like time and materials, there's no dispute. You're effectively just paying a day rate, and that day rate's guaranteed. So it's a different agreement and a riskier agreement, I would say.
Okay.
Managed.
Phil, you've seen a few statements of work with your clients that you work with. Does that sound? Do you think Tom's covered it off there? Have you noticed anything else that you'd include in the sort of how you would describe a statement of work, if there is such a thing as a generic one?
Yeah, I mean, they do. You're quite right. There isn't. It's hard to pin down a generic one, and those that are more generic are probably those least fit for purpose. I mean, I'd say if your statement of work is quite short, and consists of just a small number of sentences, it's probably not going to meet actually the criteria. And Tom mentioned a few things there about success criteria and things like that, and that should also be reflected in the contract, because all you've got to constantly remember is that you are a business. You are Phil Bennison Limited. You are not Phil Bennison as a person coming in to do that work. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about what different forms they can take. They can be quite readily sort of transferred from a proposal and things that you put forward as a business to solve a client's issue or problem, or proposing, a service or solution, and then you carry that through into the statement of work once agreed with the client. I mean, I think we're touching on later the benefits of using the statement of work as well. So I'll hold some of my information for that.
And just one on this, so I've heard it mentioned that you can have a Gantt chart that will sit alongside a statement of work, or even that the statement of work will be sort of transferred or translated into something like a Gantt. Is it called a Gantt chart, where you sort of, there's little blockchain bits of you need to do this bit, the process that gets signed off, then that bit, then that bit. Is that typical what we might find, that sort of use of that kind of software?
It's not normally placed within a statement of work. It's normally just used to monitor the progress along it, but it's not normally included. But it can be. I mean, the statement of work is a fairly open and living document in some ways.
Right. Okay. So why then, Phil, might a statement of work help with IR35?
So essentially, what it boils down to is demonstrating that you're a business, and to do that you need a contract for services as opposed to a contract of service. So what you're essentially doing is this is the written agreement for my business to provide this to the client. It needs to be very clear in black and white. It needs to ideally hold risk to it. I know there are a lot of contractors who don't like the idea of shouldering risk, but I mean, at the end of the day, that's a key fundamental part of operating like a business. And a statement of work clearly demonstrates that you're accepting the risk for non-completion. It's very clear what you're delivering. There's no question that you're being brought on as a resource to operate on a sort of ongoing basis and to be retasked by the client as desired. It can support other areas such as the right to provide a substitute, because you're clearly saying, look, this is the blueprint of the work to be delivered. And when it gets up to a certain point, hey, you know what, if you take a week or two off and the substitute steps in, it's clear at what point they're stepping in, how they can pick up that work and run with it, because a key part of providing a substitute is, well, how can you, if you're sort of 6 months down the line as a project manager and expect someone to just step in and sort of hit the ground running, so to speak, can be hard to demonstrate that with a statement of work. And it kind of boils down to that statement that, without data, you're just another guy with an opinion. So without a statement of work to demonstrate it, it's all well and good saying to HMRC, yes, I operate like a business and I'm here to deliver, a fixed set of deliverables. Well, how do you demonstrate that if it's not in writing? Yeah.
And we've mentioned in this slide the Kay Adams case. Now, Kay Adams, I don't think probably ever had a statement of work in place, particularly in this engagement, which was under investigation by HMRC, which was for a TV show that she delivered. Kay Adams is a TV presenter, for those that don't know, and she's best known as being one of the loose women on the TV show Loose Women, which is an ITV show. But it was a program that she did with the BBC, which was under investigation. It was called the Kay Adams Show. And the tribunal, the first tier tribunal, found that IR35 did not apply to that engagement. And the key reason that they landed on for that was because Kay Adams was in business on her own account. Now, interesting thing about that case is that it was appealed by HMRC and went to upper tier tribunal, and the upper tier tribunal upheld the first tier tribunal ruling. So it really reinforced the importance of being in business on your own account from an IR35 point of view. Now, as I say, I don't know, but I don't think that there was ever a statement of work in place for that agreement. But if you do have a statement of work, it can reinforce that point, because they do tend to be an agreement between two businesses. So if you've got an agreement between two business, it means one of those entities is a business, which means that it will point to the fact that they're in business on their own account. So it's just worth pointing out. And one other final thing to say on that is that rumours abound that may be being appealed again by HMRC. It's a very important case. This is slightly off topic now, but it's an important case for HMRC because, of course, they've just introduced these rules which ask the client to make an IR35 determination about an engagement, possibly before they've even met whoever it is that might fill that role. Now, how are they going to know whether the contractor is in business on their own account and they don't even know who that contractor is yet? And that's why I think HMRC are so keen to continue to appeal that one. I can't confirm it, I don't know, but that's the rumour is that may go to the Court of Appeal.
Yeah, and it's just briefly to add that a key part of demonstrating that you're in business on your own account is the ability to profit by your own choices and actions and achievements. So that success criteria is really important for that, because if you can finish what is an agreed sort of piece of work that you expect to take 6 months, you can do it in a month or two. Happy days. You're still going to get paid.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Why might a statement of work not help so much with IR35 status? So I've had a few thoughts on this, but would welcome any thoughts from Tom and Phil as well. The main thing to remember is when it comes to IR35 or off payroll working, is that when we are looking at status, it is the working practices which will hold all the clues to whether IR35 applies or not. The written documentation, whether that be a written contract or indeed a statement of work, will be a tribunal, if it ever got to tribunal, would look through that. They build what's called a hypothetical contract, where they put the written agreements to one side, they look at the working practice, and they build a hypothetical contract around that. And then they decide whether IR35 would apply based on that. It is very important, therefore, that any written documentation must be reflected in the actual on-the-ground practices. The key thing here, and I think Tom was sort of, I think both Tom and Phil sort of mentioned this right at the very start. The key thing here is you can't just conjure up a statement of work or something that you're calling a statement of work, put that in place of your existing engagement and carry on as you were before and say, this is the answer to IR35. And I think, Tom, you were saying before to me offline that you've been concerned from some of the things that you've heard and seen going on in the market, where people perhaps are a bit misled on this. They think, oh, get a statement of work in place and that's fine, IR35 doesn't apply. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's a general misunderstanding there, and it's not restricted just to contractors, agencies, consultancies. I think even, or even the end client, I think even legal advisors are really struggling to understand when something's contracted out. But the problem is, if you're ill-informed, or until there's more case law, if you're creating a document that's a statement of work, ultimately isn't much different to a standard headcount requisition with deliverables, and then people are assuming that they're in the clear as sort of where does the tax liability sit? And also some of these documents, I know we're talking about the hypothetical contract, but obviously with IR35, everyone spent a lot of time ensuring the wording, the drafting was correct in relation to, the risk factors in IR35, substitution, whatever it may be. And you'll find these agreements weren't built for that purpose. These agreements were built for providing, services via a consultancy, using your permanent staff, generally using your permanent staff, maybe providing intellectual property, whatever it may be, but it's a different agreement. So it's very common for them to refer to individuals. It's very common for them to refer to staff augmentation and, or resourcing, as opposed to just being specific to a service. And because of the way, I think HMRC aren't going to be able to understand every type of professional services, services business. I don't think anyone does. If you look at your community of contractors, no one would know what the appropriate way to agree a piece of work would be across that spectrum. And so they're going to have criteria to define what's, when's work accepted. At what point is that, at what point is that an accepted delivered work packet? Now, if you've got to really define that, that can fly in the face of supervisor,
exactly, yeah,
direction and control. Although it's a standard testing, testing and acceptance process in one industry, it looks like rather than being the person behind the strategy and the plan for that particular work packet, all of a sudden someone else is saying, well, that's okay or it's not. So it's, I think there are things where too much drafting might send the wrong impression, even if it's completely unintentional.
I completely agree, and this is you're referring in a way to that sort of last bullet point, if you want to call it that lowest point there on the side, which is it's possible that a statement of work could contain elements that would actually count against you if HMRC were to ever look or decide to investigate the IR35 status of a particular engagement, such as they may name certain individuals and having very tightly defined approval processes, which could all point towards perhaps a lack of autonomy on the part of the contractor, and it would perhaps demonstrate that in fact the end client here or the service provider has a great deal of control over how, where, and when that work will be done, all of which could count against you. So you have to be quite careful on that front. So I think the main point that all three of us would like to sort of get across here is Statements of work are not an automatic remedy for everyone's IR35 problems. They sometimes will have no bearing on the IR35 status of an engagement because HMRC will look straight through it and just say that doesn't really apply here. And other times HMRC might look into it and think actually there's stuff here which helps our case in building a case that IR35 does apply. And Tom, you're absolutely right. Although I say, look, the written documentation doesn't matter, you've got to look at the working practices. I mean, that is true, but we've always said, get a good contract in place, because if you've got a bad contract, HMRC will look at it and go, well, that's a bad contract. IR35 applies here, and they'll use that as a launch point for an investigation. If you've got a really, really watertight IR35, what we call IR35 friendly contract, HMRC will say, well, it's not really about the contract, let's look at the working practices. So you need to have a good, you need to avoid having a bad contract, let's put it that way. Right, let's move it along, because we are in danger of going on for too long or not having enough time for questions. So Tom, do you want to tell us a bit about contracted out services and where that fits into this picture?
Yeah, I think this is all part of the confusion you referred to before. I mean, if you look at the legislation, IR35 doesn't, the off-payroll legislation wouldn't apply in the event that you contracted out the service. It's a genuine outsource to a company that falls under the small company exemption. So I think a lot of agencies are positioning themselves as consultancies. They're under 10.2 million in turnover. They contract out the service from the client, or they think they do, or the client thinks they do, perhaps not. And then it goes back to the, you know, what we've been used to for the last 20 years, where the contractor decides their tax status. So there's no status determination statement. It's business as usual. You look after your tax affairs, and you need to make sure that you're careful to ensure that you're paying the right taxes. But it's super woolly. The HMRC definitions of what contracted out are, they're not relevant examples to what you would see in an expert sort of services environment, whether it's technology, engineering, something that involves you know, a high degree of knowledge. All the examples are completely wrong. They're like, you know, window cleaning or whatever it may be. No offense to window cleaners, but you know, if I look at how they've described what contracted out is, or what I would, you know, an analogy, if you in an office like we were in the good old days, that office was probably owned by a pension company. That pension company handed the running of the office to a facilities management company. They then handed security, cleaning, you know, canteens, whatever it may be, to a number of third parties. So you can outsource certain functions, certain sort of facilities quite easily, because they don't really involve any communication with the service buyer, i.e. the pension company. So I think it's very different when you're talking about contracting out an IT service, for example, because the end customer needs to decide what's the product roadmap, what do they want from this product, and therefore the whole, you know, issue of who's actually responsible for the service becomes quite ambiguous. And I think there's a general lack of understanding in terms of, there's probably no case law to support it, but you know, what is contracted out? At what point does this come under the jurisdiction of the, you know, the agency, if they're suddenly becoming a outsourcing provider? And at that point, you know, does it then go back to small company exemption, and you just carry on business as usual? You know, off payroll worker rules don't apply because of size.
Well, to help try and illustrate that point, I've got a bit of a diagram coming up, but we've had a question from Byron. It says, if you're working under a statement of work and it's challenged and it's found to be incorrect, if all tax liability lies with the end client, does it matter as long as the end client has made a formal statement that you're outside of IR35? So quite a lot in that question. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it on to the next slide, Byron, which I hope might sort of try to explain this a little bit. So what we have here is a slide that I've used quite a lot before. Some of you might have seen it before. This really explains how the new IR35 rules work in the private sector. And I really should stop calling it IR35 and refer to it as off payroll, because there are those that remind me that IR35 is actually a bit different. If you look at the column on the left, where you have a small end client, as we know, small end clients are exempt from the new changes. They don't have to worry about IR35, as we were. That's IR35. That's Chapter 8 of the Income Tax, Earnings and Pensions Act. There's a new Chapter 10. That's the whole new world. Chapter 10, which came in for the public sector in 2017, has now been updated to include all the private sector engagements, but only where the client is not small. But the column I really want to refer you to back up what Tom was saying is on the right-hand side. Now, here we have a contractual chain where we have an outsourced service, a contracted out service. And the end client there, as you will see, does not have a yellow or a red box around it. That means they do not have to make an IR35 status determination because they're getting a contracted out service. They are not going to be liable for any tax because it's a contracted out service. So as you will see, it is the service provider there that has the liabilities for making the determination in the first place and making the and has liability. Now, if that service provider is small, then we go back to our left-hand column, and there you can see that in fact it is the personal service company or the contractor that retains that, just as they have done for the last 21 years of IR35. That's Chapter 8. That's the old-fashioned IR35 that would apply there. And so there are those, as Tom was saying, that are thinking, well, hang on a minute, if we just outsource this service, then we can absolve the client from having to worry about this at all. We're a small company, we're a small consultancy, say, so that means that we don't have to worry about it either. So we just basically get round the whole new chapter 10. We just don't have to worry about it at all. And if we put some statements of work in place in this contractual chain, that's going to demonstrate that, and we're all going to be sort of okay. I think that this is an area that will be looked at quite closely by HMRC over the next few years. And I do think, as Tom, you were saying, that there's a lot of confusion about what is and what isn't a contracted out service, and how can we decide that something is a contracted out service and how can't we. I think that we may get some disputes on this front, and it will be very interesting to see if HMRC ever decide to take a client to court. Going back to Byron's question, Byron, the end client, if you look at the right hand column there, if it is decided, and I think what you were getting at is if it's not really a contracted out service, or if HMRC decide it's not a contracted out service, and in fact that service provider is actually just acting like an agency, body shopping in some labour to the end client, HMRC will go after the end client and they will say, you should have done a status determination for each one of those engagements, and you haven't done that, so now you are liable for the tax. If they won't have done that, if it is an outsourced service. So I think in your question you said, well, does it matter as long as the end client has said that IR35 doesn't apply? Well, in fact, the end client would never have done that, because they thought that they were off the hook, and it was actually not their responsibility to do it. It was the service providers. And this is where I think we will get some confusion. So your question kind of cut to the heart of the confusion around here. Does that, do you think that that's explained it well enough, Tom and Phil? Anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I just my main thing was about potential risk for the contractor. So in that example where say it is a fully contracted out service, HMRC agrees, but the new end client, i.e. the consultancy, doesn't meet the small criteria, so they have to provide a determination. If they disappear at some point, the liability will bounce back onto the contractor for those taxes if HMRC felt that determination was incorrect, because there is that transfer of liability within the chain. And one other thing is, I think, I'm not sure about historically, but what I know recently, and make myself very unpopular here, supporting HMRC in some areas, is actually they have nailed down around. Sorry,
you don't want to do that on this webinar.
No, I know, but they have been a lot clearer around what contracted out services are, and it is hard to define. I mean, usually if you're in doubt that it's possible that it probably isn't actually fully contracted out, but there is further guidance and stuff around it. So as they're putting it in black and white and drawing a line more firmly, then you can, I suppose, in theory, get your toes up to, but you at least should know either side you stand on it. And you can have mechanisms of sort of an interface of communication between contracted out service, but that's another good thing to put in the statement of work. There's a clear communication chain, sort of a relevant manager within either organisation that is the interface point. So if you are engaging a contracted out service for, I don't know, cleaning your offices, there should be an acknowledged sort of manager that you can move or communicate instruction through without violating that supervision, direction and control.
Great, thanks. I'm going to, at this point, just to move us along a bit, launch the next poll question. Now, we're going to be moving on to a little bit about thinking about some of the commercial risks that can be posed here. So this question is in reference to that. So have a look at this question and fill it in and let us know what you think. It's a slightly more detailed question, so I'll give you a bit longer to consider it. At the oh yes, thank God. Oh, it's a bit of a relief when I see that people are filling it in. I haven't done one of these before. So yes, people are filling it in. Well done. I'll leave this one up for another 20 seconds or so. Quite even split on this one as well, I can tell you at the moment. One of the options doing less well than the others. You might be able to guess which one that is.
There's a good question here actually from a Benjamin around project and program management and the accepting of risk.
Go ahead.
So yeah, if you're happy for me to.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
Firstly, if you're managing any of the client's team as part of that project team, you're at risk of being sort of deemed inside IR35. Anyway, long story, I won't go into it now, but it's to do with sort of integration in terms of your working habits and that sort of thing, regardless of what the contract will say in terms of, like, say, you can choose whenever you work and whatever. You'll usually need to integrate those working hours with the rest of the team. But in terms of risk, again, HMRC see it as risk is part of doing business, you know, whether you're selling toasters from Currys or providing professional services. You should accept risk to some degree in terms of what you're doing. Shouldn't always, you know, have to incur that risk, but you should face it. So yeah, there might well be significant risk and you'll just need to offset that with your pricing.
Thanks, Phil, for picking up that one. Now, I've closed the poll and I hope you can see the results, but I can't see whether you can. I'll just read them out in case you can't. I hope you should be able to. So 24% of you answered 5 days, 36% of you answered 10 days, 30% of you answered 21 days, which, you know, about a month, and only 10% said that they would be prepared to wait for 3 months before they would collect a payment. So I'm going to move on from that then and let Tom reflect on that as he, can I hide that? Sorry, bear with me while I get used to this new system. And as we talk about some of the commercial risks of using statements of work.
Sure. I mean, it's quite easy to walk into accidental traps of statements of work. I mean, I think you've mentioned it somewhere near the middle. I mean, your typical manager that's allowed to sign off a statement of work is a fairly senior manager in an organization. So they're quite commercially savvy, they're used to negotiating, and they've got a big budget, and they're not going to want to get into the minutiae of the detail on every negotiation. So if they're trying to push something through an SOW channel, they don't want to spend hours and hours hours or days on end negotiating a very detailed contract, which is where you're going to remove the ambiguity and remove your risk. So you're sort of dealing with a fairly difficult scenario where you've got to find a balance between getting your risk covered but not turning the manager off. If this new zone is going to be populated by consultancy arms of recruitment companies, the brokers aren't really going to be able to do a lot to help you. They're not going to understand the project life cycle. They're not going to understand probably in great detail the specific work that's being delivered to be able to interject and go, haven't you considered that? What about this? Could you mitigate like that? That like that. Because any contract, most times there's a concern in a contract, you can find a path. It's just about discussing it and finding another way to, to make the other party happy. I'd be amazed if anyone gets sight of the agreement that sits upstream. So in the instance that you're signing up to a schedule of work yourself and you've got fixed price bits in your contract, you're not going to get to see the master services agreement, which is typically going to take precedence and really overrule many of the clauses you've signed up to. So if you think you're guaranteed a payment in the event that you deliver your current sprint by X date, if it delivers Y, you might not be, because there might be something in the master services agreement that allows the end client to withhold payment, to reject, to request a rebate, whatever it may be. So there's I think a lot of the risks you're never going to see. And then there's loads of political stuff internally, for you to release this. I mean, in an IT scenario, if you're creating a new piece of software, a new release piece of software, you're going to need a release environment. So if you don't get paid until that software has been released, and you've got to have a certain number of users adopt it, or whatever it is that's your success criteria, if it can't be released because you can't get a release environment, you're not going to get paid. So it's definitely better if you're entering into an SOW for it to be something more agile in nature with shorter release cycles. But there are so many unfathomable issues. You could be reliant on, you're going in any form of analyst role, you've got to go and interview a load of stakeholders to be able to, gather, run the workshops, to be able to gather the requirements, to be able to document the requirements. If those stakeholders don't like the manager that's signed off the SOW, don't care about the project, and don't want to make themselves available, you've got no influence to force them to attend the meeting, to be able to get the outputs of that meeting that you've got to document. So, it's kind of vast and deep and wide, the level of risk that you can sign up to. And you need to understand it to an extent. When I've put these things together and it's involved liaising with a large number of stakeholders, all of those stakeholders have had to be named, and there's had to be a second potential stakeholder to stand in the event that this one stakeholder is not available because they've gone on an international trip or whatever it may be. So the devil's in the detail. There needs to be loads of it, and most managers just don't want to give you, spare the time to review some really complex document. I think if it's not a very, very quantifiable piece of work, that you shouldn't be considering putting anything in there apart from a discovery period. It should be, and it'll feel like time and materials, months 1 to 3, or whatever period it needs to be to make it quantifiable should be discovery. You shouldn't be committing to delivering anything, because anyone that's ever done analysis knows that if you lift the surface, you can find out that you've been told that this, there's only 5 places in the organization that are responsible for contacting people externally, GDPR, and then you fail to consider that everyone sends an email. There's, hundreds of departments with hundreds of different communication mediums, databases, etc. So I think you should never feel pressurized to sign anything or to put forward a proposal for anything that you don't understand and can really, really be certain of the scale and the scope of the work.
Yeah, that's good. Good advice.
Sorry.
Go on, Phil.
No, I was just going to say, it brings to a point I actually meant to mention earlier around mission creep. And one of the risks is that if you creep beyond what's in the statement of work, then of course HMRC can argue that the statement of work isn't an accurate reflection of the work and engagement. So it's a useful document to have, but only if you abide by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But is there a commercial benefit on mission creep, perhaps? In other words, that because you've got a much more tightly defined project ahead of you, I mean, many contractors watching this will be familiar with the idea that they're brought in to do one thing, but suddenly they're expected to do something else and something else. It can impact your IR35 status for one thing, but also it can just be sort of, commercially quite annoying. So could it be a good thing to have a statement of work?
It enables you to back requests by clients for, shall we say, sort of freebies on top of what you actually agreed to come in to do, or just stick a price tag on it, and you're sort of like, well, sorry, but we'll have to formally make this extra piece of work part of the statement of work. Someone mentioned change controls in the question, but should always have a price tag attached. So it's kind of funny, some of the stuff mentioned there around sort of payment times and stuff. So one of my sort of childhood friends is he's a plumber. He runs his business, makes a good wedge doing it, but he's forever chasing money for months down the line. But also, I can imagine that if he was working on the job and one of his clients said, "Oh, can you just do this bit extra or do my other bathroom as well?" It would all come with a price tag because he is running a business, and that's just always got to be paramount in your mind, is that you are a business representing your company. You are not an individual in that sense.
I'm just going to cheekily use that to plug something else that we're doing at IPSE, because you mentioned your childhood friend who's forever chasing money. Late payment, huge issue for a lot of self-employed people. We are going to be on a newly formed prompt payment code compliance board. So IPSE is going to have a seat on this new board. We are going to put something in our newsletter about this tomorrow, but we have been really pressuring the government around late payment. It's been very bad during the pandemic as well. It's having a big impact, not just on finances, but on mental health. So we're really pleased to see the government taking this step. So look out for more news on that one. Just wanted to sort of plug that because I was just writing up something about it before we joined. So thanks for that opportunity, Phil. That wasn't scripted, I promise. It was just, and I couldn't let that opportunity go begging. Right, let's move. We've got 15 minutes to go to the end. Let's just have a quick chat about this, and I've noted down a few questions as well. But look, just quickly, are we seeing more of these? Are statements of work becoming more commonplace? Are we seeing more a move to more outsourced services? Is this something that you guys are seeing in your professional lives?
Yeah, I think
Tom,
so.
Or Phil? Yeah, go on, Phil.
I'll let Tom go first. I can see he's keen.
No. You fire ahead. I was probably going to be slightly scathing, so I'll let you put in a positive first.
So yeah, after you, sir. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, the reality is yes, seeing a lot more of it. Sometimes accurately, sometimes it's about sort of restructuring and making an operational decision from the client side in terms of how they're engaging and you know, projects as a service, all of which you know, HMRC are clear is perfectly legitimate as long as it's done right and accurately, and that is really my one takeaway from all my years working with HMRC. You know, as much as they are quite demonized, but one thing they like is transparency and accuracy, and as long as it's accurate, and in particular they love transparency, is just, you know, you're in the clear generally, although as Tom says, there are risks around master service agreement and so on. But yeah, certainly I've seen a lot more of it come along.
And Tom, what's your observations on that?
So our clients looking to outsource projects more frequently, I think, you know, off payroll worker rules have made that very much apparent, but not within the UK to recruitment agencies particularly, I would suggest. I mean, you don't, if something's genuinely outsourced, it's fixed price. Fixed price isn't a great scenario for either party, because you know, if you're delivering the service, you bake in a load of costs to have contingency for unforeseen risks. If you're, you know, if you're paying for the service, then you're basically paying for a load of, you know, a load of work that may never get delivered. So it's typically more expensive to engage on a fixed price basis, and someone's always going to lose. You know, you're either going to plan it wrong, not you know, and use all that contingency and a load of extra time because you screwed up the scope, or you're paying for something you're not getting. So I don't think personally that everyone's going to want to run out and write, you know, fixed price SOW agreements to solve the IR35 problem. And I think as an industry, we need to adapt to actually do time and materials properly. You know, if you, I mean, Phil's example, I think is a good one with a plumber. If you arrange for a plasterer to come to your house, even though you're paying them on a day rate, you still get a proposal. We're pretty bad at doing this in the project services world. You know, we have interviews as opposed to meetings, and we fail to put in proposals. How our company would deliver the, you know, how our company would deliver the work, an estimate, you know, an estimate on how long we'd anticipate it would take, you know, the approach, what the likely high level deliverables would need to be able to complete this exercise. And I think all of that, if we're doing it right, means that there isn't a need for a schedule of work, really. I mean, I take my car to the garage, I'm told it's going to take a certain period of time, like you require these parts, and then I get a phone call telling me, well, we've encountered a problem, it's probably going to take this additional time, do you want to do it? I think schedule of work is not required to actually be delivering against a set of deliverables and to be sort of bearing risk and operating like a business by proposing a piece, you know, pieces of work. And I think bearing risk can happen in time and materials. Every contractor has stayed, you know, being contacted on a weekend because some release went horribly wrong, or stayed late because they've got a project that's unfinished, without any expectation of pay. So risk is borne anyway. So I don't know if it's the right tool, you know, it's horses for courses.
And just quickly, because I always like to ask any guests we have on about this, just are you seeing clients determining that everyone's inside IR35, or doing the blanket ban where they just say, no, if you're going to work with us, you've got to be on payroll? Or are you seeing some clients actually doing proper assessments and finding that some roles are outside of IR35? What are you seeing out there in the marketplace at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I've got contractors outside of IR35, and there are assessments being done, you know, using a variety of different processes, tools, and third parties. So it is happening, but I think also it would be, you know, as an industry, I think we need to prepare better to be setting ourselves up for success, you know, approaching these things, you know, as a business, putting forward these proposals, etc. But there is, you know, there is certainly a percentage of the marketplace that intend to continue using expert services, you know, in the way that the providers want to provide to. Unfortunately, the bigger proportion are probably doing the blanket bans, I guess.
And Phil, what's your view? What's going on out there? Are clients putting everyone inside IR35, or are they finding ways to put some of the roles outside?
Well, obviously they come to me because they want to be compliant, but also, you know, to make sure they've got someone who knows the landscape and can ensure that where it's outside, they're confident that it's outside, and they're certainly not, you know, no one would pay me to come in and sort of enforce a blanket ban, certainly because I don't think it's ethical, let alone operationally good business. So all I see is clients saying, look, we're confused. We're not entirely confident how to step forwards. Can you help us with this? But overall, that just speaks of that there is that goodwill out there to engage contractors in a confidently inside and outside fashion. And just to pick up on one of the questions, or half a question from Hannah Maria, and it ties in with this slide about can contractors take the lead in designing a statement of work, is yes, Hannah Maria is absolutely correct, they can do. And that can reassure clients as well when you engage with them that you've got that knowledge and that confidence to be operating as a business. And I would essentially just couch the statement of work as a proposal to start off, like, you know, you mentioned essentially an exploratory session to sort of see exactly what they're looking for. Then you build in your proposal and you present that to the client. You don't go for a job interview necessarily. You just go for an exploratory session and a proposal. And you know, if they accept it, then build that into your statement of work, and it all helps to build a sort of portfolio around how you're operating like a business, because as an employee you don't have to do anything like that. You just essentially start up, you get told what to do on the day.
Great, thanks. Now we've had loads of questions, and I want to, with as usual, run out of time to answer all of them, but we will get to. I just want to make a quick plug for our National Freelancers Day. It's on the 17th of June. You will be sent an email after this webinar, which will include a recording for this webinar and a few helpful links. Tom, we're also going to, and NFD as well will be in there too. And Tom, you've published an article about statements of work, I think, and we're going to include that link as well. Is that right? You published it this morning?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a short article on LinkedIn. I just went to a bit more detail in terms of what is a statement of work, how does it differ to a standard headcount requisition, etc. And there'll be a couple of follow-up pieces that I'm going to release as well, relating to the obvious risks in terms of defining the scope of work and the more hidden risks,
Right.
into the sort of political risks you can sign up to if there's no confidence in the approval chain for your particular deliverable. So
great, thanks. There's a QR code in front of you now, so if you hold your phone up to that, you'll be able to provide some feedback on whether or not you found this webinar useful. Don't go anywhere though, because we're still going to do some questions, and I even have one more poll, our last poll. It's a simple-ish one to share with you, if it's going to work. Why isn't it? My poll's not working now. Let me try it again. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Right. The last question is right there in front of you now. So please, I'll give you 30 seconds to fill that in. We've had a few questions. So here's one from Ika Charina. I hope I pronounced your name right, who asked about how do we know if the end client is small, or how is a client defined as small? So a client must meet 2 of the following 3 criteria in order to be small. That is, they must have equal to or less than 50 employees, equal to or less than 10.2 million turnover, equal to or less than 5.1 on the balance sheet. If they have 2 of those 3 things, then they are small for the purposes of this legislation. Martin and Marilina have asked about overseas contracts in relation to this. So if your client is overseas, you're based in the UK, your client's overseas. If the client has no entity here in the UK, then they don't have to worry about IR35, but you do. So that's, again, it's back to that whole chapter 8, the old-fashioned IR35 applies, not the new rules. They don't have to worry about this. Whether there's a statement of work in place or not in that arrangement won't make any real difference to that fundamental rule of which set of legislation applies for overseas clients. If they have an entity here in the UK, though, then that entity could be held liable, and HMRC could say, hey, why haven't you done a status determination statement on IR35? Ian's asked, if there's a statement of work directly between a personal service company, we don't like that phrase, but we know what we mean by it, a contractor limited company, and the end client, there's no agency or service provider involved. Let's just put a statement of work in there, which you can have. You can have a statement of work there, why not? Does the contractor in that instance hold the IR35 liability? No, the fact that there's a statement of work there won't make any difference. What makes a difference is whether or not the end client is small or medium or large. If they're small, then the contractor has it. If they're medium or large, then the client has it. We've got another question here from Carol, which I'll just read out. We have independent contractors based in the UK, but with an independent contractor agreement with a US company. They get paid commission based on deliverables and have complete autonomy in how, where, and when they work. Where does the responsibility for determination lie and their tax liability? I don't know if Tom or Phil can pick that one up, whether you want me to repeat a bit of it.
Yes.
I got baffled halfway through, I'm afraid. I can't answer.
Okay, right, and so basically, Carol is saying that they have independent contractors. I'm wondering whether Carol has a consultancy or something like that, with an independent contractor agreement with a US company. They get paid commission based on deliverables. These are the independent contractors. And they have total autonomy. Where does the responsibility for determination lie and the tax liability in an instance like that? So you've got contractors working via a consultancy, I think is Carol's consultancy, end clients in America. I mean, I can answer it. It's basically, if the end client doesn't have any, so there's a few things here. If you're providing an outsourced service, Carol, then you have that. If you're not providing an outsourced service and you're just supplying labor, then the contractors will have it unless the US company has an entity over here in the UK. I need to close this poll down and share the results with you. I don't know how to do that now. I've got confused.
There's a couple of questions I can see as well I'm happy to sort of run with. But for anyone that doesn't get a chance, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy. So for example, Callum Ramage, you had quite a complicated question. I could provide an answer, but I'm not going to do it now just because of time. Drop me a note on LinkedIn. Always happy to either just answer it on LinkedIn or field a call with you, especially, always happy to help people. What goes around comes around. Lawrence, you mentioned around managing staff. Very hard to get outside of IR35 if you're managing people's staff. You could try and argue around substitution and clauses like that, but if you're a program manager, you're often engaged for a lot of your softer skills around just pure qualification. And there was I think it was Anne who mentioned around sort of why doesn't everyone just ditch the intermediary? If you have a limited company that you provide your work through, that is the intermediary. So I hope I understood that right.
Yeah. Well, sometimes actually, because there was a lot of confusion in the new legislation about this, who is the intermediary. They had to change the legislation at the last minute. So the trouble is, you're absolutely right, Phil. In the old days of IR35, and still in the current days, the intermediary referred to the limited company, the contractor's limited company. That's why IR35 was officially known as the intermediaries legislation. However, we now have these complex supply chains, and there was a bit of a confusion over what was meant by the term intermediary in the legislation, whether that could be an umbrella company or an agency or even a client in the supply chain. Someone sitting in the middle of the supply chain, basically. But so there is some confusion around that. So I think I've shared with you, so 68% of you said that you would use a statement of work in the future. 29% of you are not so sure. Only 3% of you are saying no, not for me. So I don't know whether we've done a good enough job, Tom and Phil, of actually just highlighting that there are potential pitfalls to statement of work. But hopefully we've given everyone a bit more of a sense. Now, we've had lots of questions as well about indemnity clauses. We covered this loads last week. Yeah, and I've written something on our website as well about indemnity clauses, which you can go and look at. We will return to that issue, I'm sure, but we don't have time to cover it today. We have doubts over whether they're enforceable, but they could be. Have a look at my blog on the IPSE website about indemnity clauses. In fact, we'll put that link into your email that you're going to get as well. We're going to have to end it there. Thanks so much to Tom and Phil for joining us today. It's been really helpful. I'm going to hide that now. And have I shared the results of the thing? No, I haven't. There's the poll results. I don't know if I managed to share that or not. I've got confused with the poll.
Showed on mine. Well.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Unfortunately, I can't see that. But thank you so much, Tom and Phil, for coming on today and helping us to try to wrap our heads around this thing, statement of work. There's been so much talk about it in reference to IR35, and it's really good to start to try and get a handle on what these things are, whether they're helpful or not, what the pitfalls are, and I've found it really, really useful. Thanks very much to our audience. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer more of your questions, but we will look at your questions afterwards, and I will share them with Tom and Phil as well, and we may come back to do more on this if we feel like there's
started a group on Tom has started a group on LinkedIn, I believe, around sort of business to business transactions, so it might be useful to join that if you've got queries as well. What was the group called, Tom? I've forgotten.
That's a very good question. I think it's the B2B professional tendering group. And so what we were looking to do with it was just, I mean, we, obviously answering questions independently on SAW related stuff has become quite a handful. So if we did it in the group, we could sort of crowdsource other people's opinions and invite legal minds, etc., in, as well as commercial people. So it's not just SAW related, but it's just best practice around business to business working, how to propose for work properly, what's acceptable, how you can differentiate your business.
Tom, if you send us some details of that, then we can put that into the email as well that we send out to all the registries for this webinar. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Tom. And we will be back soon. Bye.
Thank you, Andy.